Take their seats. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Education of Community Unit School District 201, today, Tuesday, July 20th, 2010. Roll call, please.
Ms. Casey?
Here.
Mr. Charleston?
Here.
Mrs. Charlton?
Here.
Mrs. Lubeck? Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin, I'd like to take care of two welcomes. First to Mr. Kevin Carey, our interim superintendent. Welcome to the district.
Thank you.
And we'd like to introduce Kim Anderson, our new business manager. Welcome to the district.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll first start with the approval of the minutes. We have in front of us first the minutes of the May 25th regular meeting. I have handed to each of my fellow board members an insert that I would like to add on the bottom of page 3. There's any questions on that? Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve. I'm sorry.
I have one as well that I handed to all the board members.
Is that the same?
Yeah, it's from the 25th.
Okay,
and
I'm sorry.
It's the section on page 3, pretty much at the top of the page.
Okay.
And just wanted to know if everyone felt that was reflective of what happened at that point, or if they wanted something different.
So this is this the second and third paragraph?
Starts on the second paragraph.
Okay.
And just added some additional comments to the second line and the third kind of line or paragraph.
I was just going to comment that I think that this is a little bit more specific, and I really don't recall all of that. So I was wondering if we could have Judy or the superintendent check the podcast on this before we would add it.
Does anyone else have any comments on that? I do recall that there were conversations, that this was part of the conversation. But if we want to hold off on these minutes, what does everyone else feel?
I don't think there's any harm in checking the podcast, and if it's there in the podcast, then we can approve it next time.
Yeah.
Right?
How does that work? With you, Joel?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, I listened to the podcast again, so I'm
Okay.
fairly clear that it's pretty straightforward, but that's fine with me.
Maybe we can have Kevin,
Sure.
maybe you and Judy will look at this piece, and then at the next meeting, we'll put these two pieces in and go back to these minutes. Agreement on that?
Yep.
Okay. Then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the May 25th, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education that is in your folders, in your orange folders.
I'm sorry, which one was that, Marie?
May 25th closed session, that's in your folder. Any discussion on that?
So moved.
Second?
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Then the chair, June 15th, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the June 15th, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented in your binder.
I have one amendment on page 4. I just wanted to strike the words negative and public from that first paragraph under appointment of business manager.
Joel, can you tell, again, what was the page?
Page 4.
Page 4, okay.
And it's at the top paragraph where it says appointment of business manager.
Okay.
The last line of that paragraph where it says the negative public comments, I'd like
Okay.
to strike the word negative and public. So it just says the comments made regarding this matter.
I disagree with that because that is accurate. That is exactly what Linda and I stated.
But and that's fine, you express your disappointment with the comments that were made, but to say that the comments that I made were negative, I don't know if that really belongs in there.
But that is what I said, that they were negative.
I guess it kind of goes to maybe even the other minutes as well, is that we've talked about how, like, not every comment is in there, some are and some aren't. And when it's,
Right, and you just asked for
Right.
comments to be added, and we said that it was okay. So now you're saying that the comments that Linda and I stated are not okay. So we're being selective?
no, I think we said we're going to have the listen to again.
No, she's saying that the comments you specifically added, Marie.
Right.
We were okay with.
Okay.
And then, and I get Kathy saying she said this, and she feels she said this, and she'd like to see that kept there.
Okay, what,
Well, I just think it's kind of editorializing, whatever, on my point. And I think that,
Well, it was an honest discussion, and it was an honest disagreement. I think the characterization there is clearly Ms.
But they- it
Kelly's, Ms. Kelly's and Ms. Casey's characterization. I mean, it's just a reflection of what they said. It doesn't mean that you agree with it, and it doesn't mean that anybody else has to. It's just a reflection of what they said.
I guess I would weigh in here too, since my name is in there too. What it's saying here is editorializing that we don't have in our other minutes, because the piece that I put in, basically, I did not editorialize in there. Mine was basically stating something, and I didn't, the words negatively, with negative public, a lot of what we have in our minutes say, a discussion ensued regarding blah, 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 without that. And I guess there's a fine line between having a discussion and then stating what people said, because there's certainly many times that we don't include that in the minutes. So,
if it was as if Ms. Casey and Mrs. Lubin and Mrs. Kelly had said it, would it be acceptable?
well, from my perspective, what I asked to put in there,
I don't view the comments that I made as being negative, and they do. And I don't know how it was particularly expressed, but it's expressed here as the word negative and public, which is not as important to me, but the word negative associated with my comments, and I don't necessarily view them as being negative.
I guess I'm reacting to the fact that Ms. Casey would like to see it stay. And if it was Ms. Casey's words instead of a generalization, if it was actually Ms. Casey's words and it was in parentheses, she spoke, she said, would it be acceptable? I mean, if we went back to the podcast and the podcast said, Ms. Casey said, it said negative public comment, would that be an acceptable way to address that?
Well, we would have to go back and listen to see exactly what I said, but again, we were just saying that we are not putting in here verbatim what everybody said. And the gist of what Linda and I were saying was that we felt that what was being said was negative. So that's why I don't have a problem with the way it's stated in here. I do feel that it was an accurate reflection of what we were trying to get across.
I guess I would have to say, I would be, again, there's a characterization there, and you're correct. There's a gist, but there's also a gist of other conversations that don't have, like, the word negative. I felt very strongly about, money and the calling back of our teacher, but there's no editorializing. I believe I'm saying I didn't put anything in there, because there were questions I asked that I thought that I could have editorialized based on what I said. So this here is a comment on comments, does it?
Why don't we just, how about if we just change it this, Ms. Kelly, Ms. Casey and Ms. Kelly expressed their disappointment with, and then
I was actually
what
going
they
to,
believe to be negative
I was actually going to
comments or something like
suggest
that.
exactly that.
And that's
Okay.
fine with me,
In other words, between
Okay.
with and the.
because it's their opinion that the
what-
comments
yeah,
were negative.
What they believed were the.
That's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I'm comfortable with that.
Fine with
Okay,
me.
so then it would express their disappointment with their belief, what did we say?
With what they believed
With what they believed
were.
More negative comments.
were
Yeah.
negative. Okay, I'm also clear with that.
Okay,
Okay, Kathy?
yep, I'm
Okay.
fine with that.
Okay, anything else on June 15th? Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the amended minutes of the June 15th, 2010 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented,
So moved.
as amended.
So moved.
Second? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. I would ask, first of all, if everyone would go to, under consent agenda, personnel recommendations. In your orange folder, there are amended personnel recommendations.
Marie, did we want to do public comment?
I'm sorry. Are there any public comments before we get to the consent agenda? No? Okay. Okay, thank you. At the bottom of my page. Okay, consent agenda. The first one, there, in your orange folder, there is, they're amended to include the rehiring of teacher assistants, and there are a couple of changes. Judy, they're in, they're bolded in our copy, and there are 2 employees who have been removed right now based on attendance, is that right? Or
Right.
enrollment numbers? Okay. So I guess the question I had on just on that, I guess what I was asking too is to pull it out for a second. Does anyone else have anything else on the consent agenda? But, maybe I'll ask my question and then we'll maybe work on the staff that haven't been recalled yet. I know you and I talked about that. We're waiting for enrollment numbers.
Right,
on
right.
that? Okay.
I did have one question. With the employment of certified staff, there is a staff member that was part-time that's being moved up to full-time. Will we be hiring another part-time to fill in that part-time position? The Lisa Casey.
Would you need Linda, would you need to hire a part-time one?
Actually, looking at the numbers, and may need to hire a .5, which would still be a reduction of what we had.
But sometime in the future. But I was just curious because as that moved up, I could see there might be a vacancy. That was my question.
And we are, we are rehiring the teachers that we RIF, with the exception of just a few based on
Right,
enrollment numbers,
right.
which we will know after registration?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, and then I just have a question. I could be wrong, but I thought that we didn't hire the teaching assistants back until later on, closer to the beginning of the school year.
Mrs. Clawwater has completed all of her IEP meetings, and so this is, after reviewing all the IEP information, this is her recommendation as to the staffing we'll need for the aides.
Okay, and we know for sure that these students
Right,
are
right,
returning?
right.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on that area? Or I guess anything else in the consent agenda? In addition, the approval of the SASSA 10-year life safety survey, the approval of student tour requests, and the ratification of regular payroll. Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please. Mrs. McMahon?
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the health insurance broker consultant fees. Ms. Anderson, did you want to talk about that?
Yes. As part of the budget cuts for the 2010-2011 school year, we looked at a possible savings of $10,000 as a result of the district doing an RFP for insurance brokerage services. And what we did was we asked our current broker, Employee Benefits by Design, to review our account and see if we could realize any savings by maintaining that over 20-year relationship with them, and if they could look at their fees and see if they might be able to do something different for the district. Currently, the district pays Blue Cross Blue Shield an 11.3% administrative fee, of which Employee Benefits by Design receives 4% of that. So one of the things that our broker recommended was that we change the compensation that he receives from a percentage of claims basis to a per person, a per employee fee, flat fee basis. And as a result of that, we'll recognize roughly a $24,000 savings in the first year. We're looking at doing a 3-year contract. So minimally, we should save around $72,000 over the 3-year period. And right now, he and I met last week and went over the claims for the first quarter of this year. If they continue to trend the way they're trending, we'll actually save more because they're a little bit higher than what we've experienced the last couple years. So anyway, I am recommending that we approve a 3-year contract for the medical broker consultant fees on this per employee basis.
So basically, we found some more money, or we're saving some more money.
Yeah, saving some money.
That's great.
Is a 3-year contract typical?
I think they're kind of trending toward that way. I think one of the things that we looked at is I looked at the history of our fees and the way things are going. I think that that's a pretty prudent practice at this point right now. People are trending into doing that per employee fee, and I think it's a pretty reasonable fee. And we
Yeah,
can lock in.
I was just curious if the 3-year term is pretty typical or historically has been pretty typical.
Jerry Schulf is here.
Hi,
and
Jerry.
Answer that.
Typically, when we go to a direct contract, 3 years is the norm.
Okay. Have you had a 3-year agreement with the district prior?
We have no agreement with the district.
Okay.
You know what? Can you
He's
come
asking
up to the mic, please? Because that won't, it's not getting picked up. Thank you.
Typically, our agreement is basically year to year at renewal time, so it's not gone beyond that. But the compensation was different, paid 3-year fees to Blue Cross, and as part of that, then also I paid for some of the other services, such as flexible spending account. When I go to a direct billing of a fee per employee, typically it's a 3-year contract. And it seems to be more of the trend to go to a flat fee. As Kim was mentioning, our claims are actually trending forward so far this year. They're up. If things continue at the level they're at, they're going to be up about $300,000 from last year. And because my compensation is based on percentage of claims, then obviously my compensation goes up. This keeps it at a flat level. And then over that 3-year period of time, if in fact the services that you require are above and beyond what I've requested, we would negotiate that like anything else.
Yeah.
But then you know what that number is. It's locked in. It can't change from month to month or year to year.
Understood. Good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions on that? Okay. Then the chair will entertain a motion to approve a 3-year contract for medical broker consultant fees with Employee Benefits by Design Incorporated of Warrenville, Illinois, as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Ms. Casey,
Yes.
Mr. Charleston,
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Okay, the next item is the Athletico trainer contract. Again, Ms. Anderson, did you want to speak to that?
Yes. Our 3-year contract with Athletico for athletic training services for high school athletics expired this summer. And we have a proposal for a 1-year term with them. As a result of kind of the transition of the business office and the late timing of having to do this, we didn't have time to go out and bid. Therefore, we're doing the 1-year contract. And next year, this will also allow the new athletic director to get a chance to experience the quality of service that Athletico provides, make sure they're comfortable with them as the high school principal and the former athletic director were. And it's a 3% increase over the prior year, which is consistent with the increases that we've had over the last 3-year contract. And we're looking at we spend approximately $20,000 a year for training services. So I'm recommending that you approve a 1-year contract with Athletico, and then next year we'll go out and seek bids and look to do a 3-year term at that point.
These training services cover all sports.
Yes.
Okay.
And primarily, the training services are in relation to employees that are not employees, but students that are injured and kind of.
Yeah, the trainers are always at your games, and sometimes they're at practices as well.
Aren't they a state requirement for high school? Or no, the training piece of that for sports at high schools?
I'm not positive if it's a state requirement. I don't know any district that does not have an athletic trainer at all their events.
Because I asked about this last year, so I pulled the contract out from the last time, and primarily the services seem to be related to injury and to be present at
Right,
events
in
if there
case
were
of
an injury to
industry,
help with that.
correct,
So I
yes.
just wanted to,
Yeah.
when you say you're hiring an athletic trainer, I think people may think that's kind of a luxury item at this particular
Yeah.
point, and I want to just
Yeah,
kind of
no,
draw a
it's-
distinction there, if this is the purpose for.
Right, they need to be present at those events, especially at the sporting events in case athletes get injured. A lot of times they'll do pregame tapings for athletes as well who have been injured.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments on that? Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve a 1-year contract with Athletico Limited of Oak Brook, Illinois for athletic training services for high school athletes at a rate of $22.52 per hour as presented.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton,
Yes.
Mr. Charleston,
Yes.
Ms. Casey,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Carey, superintendent report?
Just to highlight a few things for you since our last board meeting. First of all, the school district has received their fully executed Race to the Top memorandum of understanding, which the board approved in May. And basically, this ensures that our district is part of the process. Unfortunately, we won't know until September of 2010 whether or not the state of Illinois will be awarded funds. And then from there, the State Board of Ed then would determine the funding level for each of the various school districts. So at least we've got our name in, and now we'll just have to wait for the process to unfold to see if the state is awarded the funds. We also received from High School District 99 a intergovernmental agreement request. Part of the No Child Left Behind legislation, when schools do not make adequate yearly progress multiple years in a row, the school district has to go through a process where they seek other districts that they can provide a choice to their parents. And so District 99 finds himself in that position. So they are sending out letters to various school districts to see if we'd be willing to enter into an agreement. And basically what that would entail then is, if the board chose to do it, the school district 99 would then notify their parents that if they would like, their children could attend Westmont High School in lieu of their high school. And I did have a conversation with Steve Carr regarding the intergovernmental agreement. And there is no mandate that we have to enter into the agreement. And District 99 may not find anyone who will enter in an agreement. Their obligation is just to make the request. And after talking to Steve Carr, we would be hesitant only because, as you know, with limited resources and without the ability to hire teaching staff, we want to make sure that the limited space that we have in our classes, we reserve for our students, rather than risk the possibility of our students not being able to take some of the classes they would like because they get bumped from another district. So our recommendation would be that we politely decline entering into an agreement with District 99. Unless the board.
Works for me.
Yeah.
All right.
Are we in agreement on that?
Works for me.
I'm with you.
Okay.
I think.
All right, then I'll respond to District 99. We did receive a FOIA request for Kim's contract and my contract, and those were forwarded to the individual. And then probably the one item that might generate the most discussion with the board, we did receive from Steve Cashman a proposal for architectural work for the district. The district, my understanding, is looking at the question of how to best move forward with our facilities, and whether the best course of action is improvements to Miller, improvements to Manning, or improvements to Miller and then possibly leveling Manning and then building a new elementary building. And so Steve Cashman is proposing going through a very thorough process in order to provide that information to the district so that the board can make an informed decision. Kim and I, we have a concern that the cost would be $70,000 to the district. And, you know, and obviously we're new to the district. You have a better history. And we're wondering if it would be best to sit down with Steve, talk a little bit about the process, and see if it can be scaled back a little bit, just to kind of give us some initial numbers for the board to review before maybe going into a bigger study, if we can kind of maybe give them a little bit more direction as to what we're looking for. But put that out to the board. If you're comfortable with the agreement that is contained in your board book, you know, Kim and I can move forward with that. Or if you'd like for us to sit down with Steve Cashman, or possibly the facilities committee to sit down with Steve and review the proposal and talk to him about some options.
We do have, or I should put this as a question. The money that we have, that Maureen was explained to us a couple meetings back, Kim, maybe you can answer this better. I think it's bond money.
Yes.
Is that money that can be used for this?
This would have to come out of our O&M fund
It
right
would.
now. Mhm.
Okay.
They wouldn't qualify as effectively pre-development sort of capital work, architectural services?
It might, you might have to
think you
pay it
could.
out of O&M now and then could
Right.
transfer to the capital projects
Would we need
later.
ISBE's approval to do that? Is that the
I
thing?
don't think so. I think if you roll forward, then, I'm not sure if there's time limits on, if you roll forward with it, you can roll it into the cost of your project, but if you don't, then it's your O&M fund, so.
Really?
And we didn't budget for this,
Well,
did
and
we?
so the question becomes the time limit issue then.
The question,
Kathy Keith's question, did we budget for this?
Yeah.
No, we did not budget for this right now.
No, I guarantee we didn't.
Well, the question that I had brought up when we had our agenda meeting was, you know, if we go forward with this, at the end of the day, all we have is another piece of paper. So is there my question was, can we get like some kind of ballpark figure from Cashman as to what it would cost to build a building for this many students and, you know, a replacement or update, and as opposed to spending this kind of money without, we haven't even.
I did go and ask my construction person at home if this was typical, if they typically have this kind of paperwork necessary to move forward on a building. And he said, yeah, they do it all the time, and that's necessary in order to have the architectural drawings and have that information. It is part of the process. It's not something we can avoid. What was it? It's the village had to do a $100,000 study for the water or the flooding.
Stormwater.
Stormwaters. It's part of the process.
So, but is this the study we wanted to do? Because I thought we had talked when this was brought up first, that we would talk about, have Miller included in on this, so it wasn't just Manning.
Miller is included, is it not?
No, actually, it would form a foundation for a reference point for Miller. In other words, you start with Manning, you do the work on Manning, you use that, particularly with respect to scope of the work. Keep going, because you got to go back. And just by way of sort of background and reference, Steve Cashman intimately participated in the sort of 15 or 18-month facilities committee process that we did. The real question, in my view, is this. And I think I'm going to throw out an acknowledgement first. I think everybody acknowledges that J.T. Manning is decrepit is the word that comes to mind, but I won't use I won't use a word that strong. But a building that is truly at the end of its useful life, structurally, from a layout perspective and everything else. So the question is, how do we advance the conversation about what we do about that? What Steve is proposing to do is basically look at the space that's there in a rebuild situation, as well as the notion of a full, brand new school, and laying out those spaces both for educational needs, because we addressed in the Facilities Committee report questions about educational spaces, mechanical spaces, MEP, which is the electrical, the plumbing, and all that stuff. So there's a whole scope of work. Ultimately, if we have to ask the community, because whatever that number is, to fix Manning or to replace Manning, it's a very large number. It's a number that we don't have today. We would have to ask the community to fund that number. The only way to have any certainty around what that number is, or what the scope of that work is to do this. This is classic pre-development cost in a real estate development. This is classic soft cost at the front end where you're doing all your architectural and your planning work. It's a big project, and this number is not out of line referencing a big project. Speaking for me, I'm comfortable with the scope because there's enough specificity in what Steve is proposing to do in terms of the Manning work that it gives us a place to have a really worthwhile conversation about taking this question to the community. Because lacking this information, I don't know how you have the conversation. How do you have it?
So you have information about renovating or replacing just Manning, and Miller is just kind of out of that conversation.
No, because actually later in the conversation, what Steve would do is effectively, within the context of that, he has ongoing projects that he can reference in terms of bid type numbers for costs, but the work that we would do in Manning would also be something that you could sort of overlay into Miller, especially with respect to mechanicals and stuff.
So I guess my question is, if we're going through the exercise of looking at possibly building a new school, or even exploring that idea, why would we consider having Miller as a separate school and Manning as a separate school? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think if you're going to spend large amounts of dollars to replace or refurbish one or both of those buildings, you should probably have a pretty good idea of what you want it to look like at the end and the scope and the nature of the work that's going to be required to make that happen. Because going to the community with just a generic question, hey, should we have new buildings, I don't think elicits a particularly productive answer. It's just...
But are you asking why not just have Miller part of this scope, part of this information?
Well, I mean, if it turns out you're going to renovate Manning, then you would, I'm assuming, renovate Miller. Well, and then there's also the South Building that could be in the mix here in some capacity. There was discussion at one point about early childhood center in the South Building. And I think that's, I mean, there's a lot of options here, it seems, And I think what I'd like to see is some sort of solid feel from our community. What direction do they want? Do they want community schools? Do they want 3 individual schools? Do they like that for our community? Or do they like the option of one large grade school? And I don't know.
I
It seems
think-
like that would steer where we go with this.
And I think what Dan's trying to say is based on the information we get from the study, you know, we might have a better idea. We'll have better information to give to the community. They could see the difference in the cost between what it would cost to renovate Manning and build a brand-new school.
And you can talk about what kind of space you're providing in that context.
Right.
And what kind of mechanicals and what kind of environment you're providing as a result of that.
I think once you have
I
that-
mean, Joel, I hear your point, which is this question of, and it is a bit of chicken and egg, right? Which is, and the only way I think to answer the question, if you wanted to get feedback from the community first, is to engage the strategic planning process, get people to say something. But even then, that would be a limited sampling of the community, right? That would be those people who participate in that particular aspect of it. So, but at some point, you're still going to have to do this much work to define the scope of the project.
You know what, as a community member, I mean, as a resident also,
Yeah.
I want to know, when it comes down to it, what kind of dollars are we talking about here?
And what are you getting for them?
Yeah.
I have to say, I agree with that. My question is, in terms of this, anything that would have to be done with Miller is only partially done here because it's an overlay, but there still would need to
Absolutely.
be more work. So,
If we wanted to do Miller, there would be more work to do
Right.
for Miller, yes.
so my question comes into, again, if there's any way, before we spend, you know, $70,000 just on one building, because you're right, as a community member, and, you know, I'd want to know, and I think before we ever go to the community with any of that, we'd have to have that question. I guess what I'm asking is if there's some way to find out any kind of ballpark numbers before we start this, because this is $70,000 only for one building. We have other buildings, and, you know, I don't know, since I've been in there, I don't know that everybody would agree that it's an antiquated building. I think there's certainly room for upgrades, so to speak, but I think one of the things that I think is going to be our job is to reach out and educate our community as to what the figures are, because, you know, as I sit here today, I couldn't make a guess. So this is a necessity, but my question is, this 70,000 still only gets us a portion of what we're ultimately looking
But
at.
gives you a really good guess at the next step.
But is the question really, if I add 4 buildings, and I say I'd like Mr. Cashman to do all of our buildings, just tell me what the cost is to do upgrades or whatever to all of them, does this cost go up?
Well, and plus you wouldn't be doing them all at the same time anyway. And am I understanding correctly that the facilities committee earmarked Manning as the highest priority?
It was the building that I think we, both Manning and South, the issues were so profound, you don't know what to put at the top of the list. Everything goes to the top of the list. Air conditioning, plumbing, electric, tuck pointing, the wood part, the panels, everything. So I think it's those 2 buildings. We just kind of looked at each other at the end of those conversations and said, what are you going to do? As is, we're doing a playground.
Well, I think, you know, I would have to say, I agree with that we need to look at what are we going to do. Obviously, you know, we're trying to put smart boards in our buildings, and we don't have the electrical to cover that. There's been a lot of discussion about the, you know, the temperature in the schools, you know, and I know I've been one of the ones speaking to that, so I know that that's out there. It's just, this sounds like a lot of money, and I know
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the
it's a
question
lot of
becomes,
money.
and let's throw out just a theoretical statement. If I were to throw out to you that a 30,000 or 35,000 square foot building cost $350 a square foot, bricks and sticks to build, which puts you somewhere in the $12 to $13 million range. Is that, but if I put out to you, so it costs $13 million to do a new Manning, but do you know what you're getting then? What kind of space are you getting? How many classrooms are you getting? What does it look like? What kind of, what kind of stuff is inside? Are there offices in there? Is it just classroom space and principals? There's all those questions that I think, I can't answer with just a round ballpark number. It's a big number, whatever that number is.
But those are not, the ballpark numbers are kind of the things you could take to the community and say, this is a good ballpark. I mean, other communities obviously have built schools. I don't know.
A serious question, how would you do that?
I don't know. Through the strategic planning process, I think is one option to get participation from the community and open it up as best you can to not just parents, but the whole community, and let the community know this is what we're going to be talking about in this round of strategic planning, or one of the issues.
So, but even
make sure that we have opened up those lines of communication so that the community can understand exactly what we're trying to get from them and get a feel for the direction they want to go. I mean, the economy right now is really bad. I can't imagine people are going to be that enthusiastic about,
No, I mean, you could take a big number, but you got to, at the end of that conversation, you got to turn it into a number per household, right? I mean, that's a conversation that says, hey, look, here's the big number, but what it means to you is X.
There's possibly a compromise position. Sometimes, I'm not, I haven't worked with Steve Cashman, I'm not sure if he'd be open to this, but sometimes you can restructure the agreement so that the district is paying a percentage of the $70,000 up front in order to get the process underway, get the information we want, and then the remainder of it you pay after a successful referendum. And so actually the remainder of the fee comes out of a referendum. So you'd have to sit down with the architect and see if he'd be willing to work with you on that basis.
Well, I don't think that a follow-up conversation with Steve Cashman is a bad idea, but if at some point this board wants to get serious about doing something about Manning, this is what it looks like.
Well, here, Dan, let me go back to something you talked about. What you were talking about, like, bricks and stones, okay? And at the one meeting that Steve Cashman was at, he was actually talking about this process of what does the school look like. And one of the things he talked about was that you need to have a number of conversations with your administrators, your staff, your community as to what that looks like.
And he's actually put that in his proposal.
Right, and so what I'm saying, I know, that's kind of why I'm bringing it up too. So I think the thing is, we just went through some pretty painful budget cuts, and I can't imagine that we're not done with that. My question is, can I sit here and say that I'm willing to spend $70,000 today on something that we really haven't opened up to our community yet? There's been, a few years ago, the Facilities Committee looked at it, and one of the items really was, take a look at Manning. So, I'm right with you that we need to look at our facilities. But my question is, we haven't even done anything yet in terms of reaching out and educating our community, because in the end, that's who's going to pay for this.
Yeah, and I guess
that's what I'm trying to juggle.
Yeah, what I'll suggest is, look, is if we're going to follow up and have another conversation with Steve, that's great. But I think the challenge for this board is going to be how we find a decision point, how we formulate what we actually talk to the community about. How specific is it? How clear is it? Because at some point, you can't just go, my opinion, you can't just go out and say, it's 12, 13, $14 million, what do you think? And do a survey, and then that's not a referendum. I think you need something, you need drawings and display boards and, a conversation about what you're getting.
Well, I think.
And how much it costs each
But
homeowner.
I think it's a tightrope, though. I
Yeah.
think we're really walking a tightrope here, because every year we have community members come to us and say, why can't we have whiteboards at Manning? Why
Right.
can't we have air conditioning in our elementary buildings? And the reasons we can't do it isn't the things you can see.
Right.
You can't see what's in the wall.
Right.
We don't know how old that stuff is or what condition it's in.
Exactly.
And every year we put it off. We put off whatever's going on in there. And we keep telling
I
people we
agree.
can't do whiteboards and we can't do air conditioning. So it's a real tightrope.
But my question is, before we even start having that discussion about whether we want to spend $12 million on a building, I think we need to talk to our community and find out what will best have an educational experience for our children, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and my
So-
question is just how do you want to do that?
Right, right. So
That's that's my question.
I'm just saying, before we do the presentations on the, drawings and all that, that we have some basis of what our community is looking to us to do. And then you're right. I'm be the first one to stand in line and start talking.
At a certain level, I could argue that given that there were 20 people on that committee, and clearly most of them were Westmont, sort of residents as well, one of the immediate recommendations we had was look at replacing Manning. And, look at it means you actually have to do something about it. So, there's a level at which I could argue we already want to know. But taking the step to
I
do
was-
something else is
if I can
fine. We just need to
interject.
bring it to a head at some point.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think, being that we had a lot of community involvement in the facilities committee, and that committee worked on it for over a year, I kind of think we already have the community's direction. I think that's what they're telling us, move forward on this. It's time to start getting the information that we need so that we can make an informed decision and include them in that. So we need to get some good information now that we can bring back to the community.
Well, this is one, Kevin, you have been through building referendums. What do you take to a community to actually get them to make an informed decision? And how do you get there?
Right, and what you're suggesting is exactly right. People want to know how many, classrooms are going to be in that facility, and, a little idea what those spaces are going to look like. The cafeteria, gym space, all those things. But, one of the things we did do, though, was structure that initial cost so that it was part of
The referendum question.
Right, the referendum question. So we're able to get some of these services done, the study done, and the upfront cost was less for us out of pocket, and then we were able to, but, definitely to just put a number on a ballot, people are not, will not support that. They want to know what they're getting for.
Well,
So-
that I like, but I think it goes back to, like you're referencing the facilities committee. We still have the discussion that we have 3 buildings. And so we never really kind of decided what we were going to do with all of those buildings. So that should probably be the bigger question instead of just focusing on one building.
Well, that was why I asked the question. I think that what I'm hearing is that Manning is in the worst shape of the 3. So I think that's why we're starting there. We're not saying that the others don't need to be addressed at some point, but we have to have a starting point, and I think Manning is the starting point.
But my question
So
the
you're
overall-
saying if we move forward with something like that, that Manning would become the one school for 201, the one grade school?
No, I don't think
No,
so at all. I think, to be, I don't know, a little bit more forward thinking than maybe I should be. I think the real question is, if you do a new Manning, it's not that you would undo Miller at all. I think that's a fine facility and it works. The question of how you use those buildings, whether they're grade
Right.
level centers or whether they're community-based things, is a different question. And the Facilities Committee, obviously, that wasn't within the purview of what we were trying to talk
Right.
about.
They were
But-
just looking
but
at
having said that-
functionality.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, but having said that, I think the only building that you really question whether or not you continue to own it is South.
Well, and that's exactly what I'm saying.
Because otherwise, the question
Right.
becomes, how do you use it? And one of the things the committee recommended was it could potentially be one of 2 things, either an early childhood center or administrative offices.
And that's what brings me to my concern about spending this kind of money on one building, whereas I think we, as a board, should be looking at what do we want to do with South Manning and Miller before we spend this amount of money just on one building, which is the oldest. I totally agree. But until...
Also the biggest.
But I'm saying until we don't have the answer, because if we decide we want to do early childhood, kindergarten, and maybe district offices at the South facility, then that changes what we would want Manning to look like. And so
See,
I'm concerned about...
Right, but I'm looking at it from a different perspective, and I think Dan is too. I think if you look at getting the information on Manning and seeing and making an informed decision on what you're going to do with Manning, then you look and see what you're going to do with the other facilities after you have the information on that facility.
And you don't.
And that's 2 schools, then you're not talking about having 1 grade school. We just got done with budget.
I don't see that,
But we're
that
not
conclusion,
saying
though.
that.
I see it as, okay, I finished what we planned on doing with Manning, how we're going to do the rooms, how we're going to do the
now with
electricity.
Miller, and then what are we
now
gonna
look
do
at
with
Miller
South?
and we say, oh, Miller, now we need this space for this. And we look at South, now we need this space for that. We haven't made a decision.
It'll give you
that-
100 ideas.
Right.
It'll give you 100 ideas.
But my question comes in, right now, the district offices are at Manning. So my question is, are we going to have Steve Cashman put together a proposal that has the district offices at Manning, or should we back up and say, we would like to use our other facilities for the district office, which is one of the things the facility committee came up
We're
with?
not
That's
going
what
to
I'm
address
saying.
that yet. We're not going to address that yet. All we're going to look at right now is the scope that he presented. And let's take a look at what information he presents to us. Once we get that information, then we incorporate the other aspects that we have to
It sounds like
think
we're just
about.
looking at it from 2 different
Yeah,
ways.
and I think from my vantage point, it really is this, it really is that Manning is the first domino.
Right.
It's the biggest domino. And I think we have to address the questions that live there.
Well, I guess
And then
yeah.
you can begin to formulate all the other strategies around the other buildings.
Well, and I guess that's one way, and I guess, that's like going
The chicken
here
and the
up
egg.
or down. So to me, I guess I would like to see, my own opinion, I would love to see some kind of structure-based, but I would also like to somehow, before we really start even talking about a referendum for a new building or buildings, to at least get some focus group
Oh,
or
absolutely.
something.
Oh, absolutely.
Before we start.
The plan isn't just simply to take this report and
Right.
go to a...
Well, that's why I was
No.
reluctant to just sit here tonight and say, yes, I approve this, without making sure that we start
I still think
that
we have to get
process.
to me, it just seems backwards. I think we need to find
agree.
out, do we want to go with 1 grade school or not, and should we focus on that? And then you can always scale that plan back.
But you can't make that decision until you know what, that's
if
why we
that's-
need
if
this
that-
information.
How would you, yeah, that becomes a question. How do you answer that question lacking anything more than a conceptual conversation?
Right.
Well, how do you answer
What
the
if the
question?
space doesn't accommodate the number that you would need at Manning? What if when the drawing is all said and done, there's not enough parking, there's not enough there's classroom space, it has to be a
That's what we would
four-story
tell
building?
Mr. Cashman to figure out for us.
Except
No.
that the footprint...
We have this many students, we anticipate this many classrooms. Remember, we just went through the budget cutting and this and that, and one of the things that came out of that was the staffing, and that if we didn't have 2 buildings and we had all the students in 1 building, that might impact the number of employees we have and
I thought,
Right?
that wasn't, no, because that wasn't, I don't recall any conversation about consolidating in
grades?
1 building.
Grade
level
centers?
centers.
I'm talking about grade level
That-
centers
that
where
was-
you would have.
The conceptual notion there is still 2 elementary
2
buildings.
buildings, right.
Not 1 building.
But it would consolidate
You
All the
would
kindergartens would be in one
consolidate
place.
some
all
of
the
the
first
some of the
grades.
differences in
K
class
through- K through
sizes.
3 would all be in 1 place. Therefore, you would have, fewer staff as a result of having
Right.
grade level centers, as opposed to having,
And that's a concept
Sections,
that
yeah.
can still be discussed.
yeah.
That doesn't affect.
But it wasn't a single building. It wasn't the consolidation of the district into a single elementary building. And the facilities committee certainly didn't make anything close to that kind of a recommendation.
But I guess that goes directly to what I'm saying, is that if we're going to ask Steve Cashman to spend a lot of time and energy and money on what do we want Manning to look like? What are we going to tell them we want Manning to look like? Are we going to tell them that we want it to include kindergarten and district offices? Or are we going to say, before you do that, let's look at using some of our other facilities for those? That's where I'm getting at, and I don't know if
And I
if
think
we're
that's-
looking at it.
That's a,
I think that's part of its process, though, is
Yeah.
meeting with the board and focus groups to try to iron out some of those things. And then, his charge is then to create the scenarios that meet, probably an option, here's with a district office in place, here's an option without a district office in place.
and would he be able to include a scenario as a grade level center and a K through 5?
Yeah, if you ask him to do that, sure.
So if we go with that understanding, and if we do speak out loud at a meeting like we're talking, and talk about how that we're not just going to go forward with this, that we are going to incorporate focus groups, I would really love to move forward if there's
I
some way
still
we
want
could
to see
structure.
if there's a way, like you had suggested,
Right,
to
Structure, yeah,
Structure.
that's
A fee
exactly,
structure.
I would agree to that too. Then we can, pay as we go or
Well,
something.
I mean, let's have the conversation with Steve.
Yeah.
But and I don't care whether it's tonight or another night, but let's presume it's another night. But please think about this notion of, what do you want to get from the community? How do you want to get that feedback?
Yes, absolutely.
Well,
Because
I-
that's a process that we need. If that's what we need, then we need to put that process in place.
I would be interested in hearing from Kevin how they developed their focus group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that,
there's,
that would
as I
be-
recall, yours was a function more of growth
Right,
than
right.
of obsolescence.
But we did, part of the process was, we had, a group of, that were, teaching staff, non-certified staff. You had board input, and then you also had parents in the community, but then also community members as well, some of the things that they would like to see in a public facility. So you did have, very wide-ranging, try to include all your stakeholders and get input from all your
Yeah,
stakeholders.
that brings up a good point. In addition to having parents, you also want maybe people that aren't parents but are still taxpayers.
Right.
So that would be, I'll tell you right now, Dan, I'm really on board with that. I know it is certainly one of the things that I've been concerned about too, but I want to make sure that our focus, and I'm sure there's nobody that doesn't feel this way, but that when we start talking about these, that it's to the line of what is going to improve the educational value and not just to have a new building, because we do, and of course we have to have plumbing and heating.
Yeah, this gets into the age-old conundrum about, do we lead or do we follow? Do we represent or do we lead kind of
Right.
stuff?
Right.
Additionally, that whatever mechanism you set up, or we set up as a board, to speak to the community, the feedback we get is going to be imperfect. Because, you can't survey everybody.
No.
Everybody won't answer. So it'll be imperfect, and at the end of that conversation, it's still going to be our decision to make about whether or not to take it to the community, and if we take it to the community, what it looks like.
And I will say, I totally agree with you, that we have to have a wealth of information to do that.
I would just like to have the, people to have the option, if they choose, if this is a passion of theirs, if they're a parent in the district or they're a taxpayer in the district, and they choose to participate in this process, I'd like to somehow get them in at the very beginning and kind of give us some ideas of what they would like to see out of it before we say, let's spend all this money and come up with a plan for Manning. And then turn around and find out that our community is going to be upset that we're only doing one school and the other schools, it's just, there's a lot of, there's
It's
a lot of
unlikely
perceptions
that
and things
we're
that are going to
gonna
happen through this
only
process that you want to kind of be aware of, and you don't just want to plow ahead, I think. I want to be careful about not plowing ahead and without giving people an opportunity to participate, and I guess that's my concern.
So can we look for that then?
Sure.
From you, a conversation, and then maybe some direction as to what your experience has been?
Yeah, I
in
can do
this?
that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, anything else on that? Do you have more in your?
I just, there was the last legal update, and unless there's, questions regarding it.
Can I just come back to one quick thing on the Cashman proposal. I pulled this one out from an old board meeting too, where they actually did some kind of estimation of the type of work they would need to do for enclosing the high school
Yeah.
rooms. And if there's any way to get some sort of ballpark figure on that, it would really be appreciated, because they kind of listed out all the things they needed to do with ductwork and this and that and all this. And if, I just, conceptually, I have no idea how much money we're talking about. And I don't want them to do a whole, formal proposal or anything, but if we could just get some information on that, it would be great.
Yeah, that, you brought up a good point, because that was in our.
It was from the 2/23/10 board meeting where we were provided kind of an outline of the types of things that were at the high school. And, I think it is worthwhile just to at least take a look at that and see if we can't get a little bit of a number on that.
And Dan, tell us, you were on the facilities committee, that was another one of the higher priorities too, was to do something about the high school and closing the classrooms.
Well, yeah, the phrase that is thrown around was windows and walls. Natural light is an issue, and then noise within the interior is an issue. But given the open design, the structural issues are all the mechanicals that have to be sort of worked to get air into every space if you start to enclose them. So, air and electric and all the other stuff. So, for the high school, yes, that was a conversation that was both relevant and important.
Mm-hmm. I thank you, Jill, for bringing that up, because that is something I know that was another high priority as I read that facilities report too, so. Okay, anything else on that? Then, so are you done with?
Yep, I'm all set.
Great. Okay, then, board reports, do we have anything? Finance?
Okay, you have in your board packet,
Could you move your mic? Thank you.
all right, is that better now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
You have in your board packet, the activity accounts, and all of the student activity accounts ended the year with positive balances. And ending fund balance as of June 30th is roughly $14.7 million. We did a couple of investments in the month of June that are listed on your investment schedule. And then as far as the budget evaluation goes, when we're looking at revenues for the education and tort funds, the district received the first installment of the 2009 tax levy, which amounted to roughly 47% collection rate. That's been the trend over the past 3 years, but prior to that, it had been as high as 49%. So revenues were a little bit short for taxes this year for the first installment. We expect, though, that to make up for that with the second round of tax collections. And then, as you know, we're all well aware, we have approximately $522,000 of state revenue that the district did not receive as of June 30th. The majority of that has been vouchered. The biggest places where we're missing revenue is in the ed fund is related to special education funding, that the majority is there. And again, you know, we're continuing to monitor the state budget, and as we develop our budget, we'll be looking at you know, making sure that our revenues reflect appropriately what's happening with the state. In the operations and maintenance fund, the revenues were slightly above the average for the 3 prior years. And in the transportation fund, revenues received to date were comparable to the prior 3-year average. The state still has not released the second and third payments for special ed transportation and regular ed transportation, and that amounts to a little bit over $200,000. They did, you know, release the fourth payment, but we didn't get second and third payments. And then in terms of expenditures in the education and tort fund, they're slightly lower than the last 3 fiscal years. Some of that is due to the late receipt of some June invoices, but we should be under budget and slightly under budget in those funds for the year. You may have noticed that the operations and maintenance fund is 130% spent, which is significantly higher than the 3-year average. And this is a result of the transfer that was made in June from the O&M fund to the capital projects fund because there was a negative balance in that. We will be reversing that. We're looking to do an abatement from the working cash fund, but we're working with our attorneys on exactly what we need to do with that, and we're waiting to see if the governor signs House Bill 6041, which makes that abatement process simple. If that doesn't happen, then we have to do a hearing on this, and we'll follow all the proper legal protocol. But so for right now, that's why that looks like that, because that didn't get repaid at the end of the year. And then the transportation fund is running below the 3-year average, and I think that's basically a result of some of our routes. So anyway, we looked like we're gonna end up in decent shape this year.
This F2, front page,
Uh-huh.
so the way this worked, this was, the beginning balance is 7109. Is that right? The left column? This one, fund balance summary.
Uh-huh.
The far left-hand column is 7109. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a full year of activity?
Correct.
So if I read this correctly, from the beginning of last year, or last fiscal year to the end of it, we were $875,000 negative in the education fund. We were $80,000 negative in the operations and maintenance fund. We were $170,000 negative in the transportation fund. And we're actually about $100,000 more negative in the insurance fund. So if those are my primary operations funds, is that right? Or am I, you can stop me if I'm wrong here.
Okay, I'm trying to,
Okay,
okay,
education,
yep,
from 9428 to 8353.
uh-huh,
That's a negative of 875,000 in round numbers. O&M, 766 to 688, that's a negative of 80, right?
yeah, I mean, your fund balance went down, you're doing deficit spending.
$1,000,002, 1.2 million last year. And the state owes us $500,000. So even without that, we're still, we were negative 700 last year.
Correct. Yes, your deficit spending, I mean, you're coming in at what, you're budgeting, but you are deficit spending while you're doing that. You're spending more money than you're taking in.
Yep.
And that's something that, obviously we're gonna have to look at going forward.
Yep.
Because we can't continue that trend.
I just wanted to make sure that,
Yes,
because that's
right, and.
that's sort of premise.
Yes,
That's
the
sort of,
goal-
it's sort of important just to say
Yes.
out loud, where are we?
Yes, the goal ultimately would to produce a balanced budget.
Does that, thank you for that, Dan. Does that take into account, like, the cuts that we made going forward that would impact?
This is just last year.
Last year.
This is just last year?
This is last year's actual.
Okay.
Yes,
Last
So-
year, actual fiscal year, we spent
Yes.
$1,200,000, operations-wise.
Right.
We spent $1,200,000 more than we
More
took
than
in.
we, okay. And next year, we would potentially do the same thing.
She's got, well, we got to work on the budget.
We're working on it. Kevin and I
But
met. Yeah.
we made some cuts going forward that would hopefully help that. I mean, I know we've just
Yeah,
done
we're still
one
gonna.
round.
Well,
I know,
And
I know.
here, here's the one thing that you really need to be cognizant of. In school district budgets, roughly 80% of your expenditures are for personnel, for your salaries and benefits. And depending upon what your contracts come in, if you're spending, between, if you're having between, if your expenses are going up 5 to 10% a year, but your revenues are only going up by 1% a year, obviously you're starting to outpace what you're bringing in. And at some point, you have to look at that and figure out how you can balance things. You can start doing cuts in, you know, supplies and materials and capital outlay, but eventually some of your capital outlay cuts, they catch up with you as well because you're not able to do maintenance or things on your buildings. And at some point, you're gonna have to do those types of things. So really, you know, in any school district, and many around the state are facing these issues, it's really about compensation. And you've got to, you know, look at that, look at ways, you know, look at your benefits and those types of things. And that's where, again, when 80% of your expenditure is in that category, those are the kinds of places where you can start to make an impact and try and bring your revenues and expenditures in line. And unfortunately, you know, the revenues are just not keeping pace. I mean, we had some very good years where we saw high interest rates, and if you had, you know, healthy fund balances, you could invest some money and earn some decent interest. We've seen our interest income decrease significantly, even though we have an excellent rate negotiated with our bank, one that's pretty much unheard of anywhere. But you know, state revenues are, you know, flat. We're basically looking at projecting them roughly flat. There's a few grants that we're probably not going to get this year. So, and we have to be very cognizant of what's going on, and we can't continue to spend beyond our means. And the goal, and that's something really the board, you know, we need direction from the board. What is your goal? Is it a balanced budget? You know, what's your philosophy on that?
We're going to have another round, aren't we?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions on the fund balances or anything? Okay. Did you have anything else on?
No, I don't have anything else.
Okay. Then. Okay, now the July 2010 expense report. I had asked a question, and Kim had given me this on our bill. What page was that? Do you think I would have this? On the Steve Cashman bill, one of the items on there. And that was for work that, with the high school. Is that right? What you were
Yes,
saying?
that was for work done at the, for the construction projects that are happening this summer. It's the architect fee for the refinishing of the floor. And I forgot to, I thought I had printed out my page. Oh, yeah, I did, I brought it,
Okay, I have it here
Yeah, the
somewhere, too.
refinishing of the gym floor at the high school and the auditorium seating
Okay.
that's being replaced at the high school. And then also at the junior high, there is, they're putting an operable, a panel partition and the new windows there.
Okay.
So that, and that's a progress billing, so as those projects are completed, will be billed in increments each month as those are completed.
Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the bills for the month of July 2010 as presented in attachment F4 in the amount of $1,939,916.89.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please, Mrs. McKim?
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
Okay, are there any public comments at this time? All right, the board is going to go into closed
Can
session.
I hang on a second?
Oh, I'm sorry.
We received an email today from Mr. Chorney, and I see him in the audience. Did you, was it
We've
forwarded
asked
to
for-
you, Mr. Carey? You don't know?
I've asked for public comment, and nobody,
No, he sent us an email and
I know,
asked
I'm
about
just-
a response from us. I don't know.
wanted you to be aware of the situation.
okay. Okay.
That was.
Okay, sure.
Okay, board is going into closed session for the purpose of conducting board candidate interviews, and we may have an action afterwards. We are not sure of that, so we're going to be going there. And there will also be closed session minutes and negotiations as discussed as well in the closed session. So we will adjourn. Chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing board candidate interviews and to discuss closed session minutes and negotiations.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Ms. Casey,
Yes.
Mr. Charleston,
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton.
Yes. So again, we may have a decision afterwards. We don't know. Thank you. We are adjourned back into open session, and there is a,
Consensus? You there?
I'm waiting for the,
Oh.
okay, there is a motion on the table. The board has discussed the board vacancy position, and there is a motion on the table to appoint Shannon Hancock as the board member to fill the position that we have. So let's take a roll call.
Can I just make a quick comment on that?
I'll make the motion, if somebody wants to second it.
Second.
Second, okay. And then we'll make a roll call, and then do a
Okay.
roll call.
I would like to make my comments just
You'll make-
before we do that, if you don't mind. First off, thank you to all the candidates. It was good to see that number of people interested in serving on the board, and I thank all of you. As a board member, it sometimes is awkward, and you feel conflicted about things you're going to do or votes you're going to take, but I feel it's always best to do what I truly believe, and so that I will be reflected in how I vote. But I truly welcome our newest board member, and I look forward to working with this person, and again, thank you to all the candidates. Excellent.
I guess I would just say the same thing. I think we're fortunate that in this, what we have in front of us, that we had 4 very good.
I think we all had, we each had our own idea of what was the most important thing that a new board member would bring to the table, and we had just some differing opinions there, and that's the way boards work.
Thank you, everyone.
So we'll, yes. And so we have a motion, and we'll take a roll call on that motion to appoint Ms. Hancock.
Mr. Charleston,
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Abstain?
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
and Ms. Casey, yes.
Okay, so the process will be then, at the next board meeting, Ms. Hancock, you will be sworn in as a board member. And again, thank everybody for their participation in this process, and hopefully, everybody will stay involved with this district. We will be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move that we
We are
re-adjourn to closed session.
adjourned to closed session.
And when we come back, there will not.
And when we come back, there will not be a vote. So we
What are
are
we discussing this time around?
Minutes.
minutes.
Minutes, okay.
Minutes.
Do we need a roll call on the re-adjourning to closed session?
Roll call to re-adjourn into closed session.
Oh, okay. Mrs. Charlton,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Charleston,
Yes.
and Ms. Casey, yes.